Good evening and welcome to the October 20th, 2015 regular Salem City Council meeting. It will now come to order. We will have the invocation tonight by Reverend Alan Smearsall from the Emmanuel Lutheran Church, followed by Troop 30 from the Presbyterian Church, and one guest from Troop 40 with them will lead us in the Pledge of Allegiance. Would we please stand now?
Let us pray. Lord, I thank you for the people that I stand before, for their dedication and care and concern for the city of Salem. So we ask that you be with us this evening, be with them as decisions are made, discussion is done, that everything be done to the glory, to your glory, and to your will, for the justice and peace of all who reside here in this city. Thank you, Lord, for their dedication and their work. In Jesus' name we pray. Amen.
Amen. Gentlemen, if you want to go ahead.
Raise your hand over your heart for the Pledge of Allegiance.
To the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
I'd like to thank Reverend Smearsall and Troop 30 and their guests from Troop 40 in participating this evening. Madam Clerk, would you please call the roll?
Mr. Brown?
Present.
Mr. Cushman?
Here.
Mrs. Dickey?
Here.
Mr. Drummond?
Here.
Mr. Nestick?
Here.
Mr. Paparotis?
Here.
Mr. Whitehill?
Here.
7 members.
Everybody's received a copy of the October 6, 2015 minutes. Are there any additions, deletions, or corrections to those minutes? Seeing none, they'll stand as approved. We have no petitions and remonstrances this evening. Move then to receiving of visitors. First, we have Scott Cahill, subject IPMC.
Mr. President, Mr. Mayor, ladies and gentlemen of council, I'm Scott Cahill. I ask that before the consideration for the IPMC is voted on, that an amendment be forwarded, seconded, and approved that allows for a committee to do the review other than the Board of Zoning Appeals. The reason for this request is that the requirements for acting on the Board of Zoning Appeals are completely different than the requirements for acting on the consideration of actions under the IPMC. I believe that the committee or board that should be convened to consider actions under the IPMC should be constituted of engineers, architects, and highly experienced construction individuals, and not simply citizens of the community, because of the incredible onus on the city to act honorably toward those who may be burdened with great cost in making the necessary repairs to these buildings under that. So I ask you please to consider doing that if possible. Also, I'd like to make a quick statement that I see a whole lot of good happening here, and not just sunshine. 2 years ago, I think that we stood on the precipice of potential failure of the city. I think that we have some very real fiscal issues that still have to be addressed, and I think that they are considerable. However, I see a number of actions that have been taken, the results of which are a much healthier city and much healthier downtown than what I came home to a couple of years ago. And I'm not one to jump up and down and thank people for doing the right thing. I think people should always do the right thing. But certainly, all involved should reflect on that and be very, very proud of their involvement, because this is a significant thing that has happened to date. Recognizing where we are and where we have been, I hope will drive us even further to continue to make the difficult decisions that must be made to get us into the future, rather than to sit back and enjoy the loveliness of the great successes that we've found. We have to look forward. We have a number of issues which are very important to make sure that this continues, and to make sure that our city that we hand over when we croak is the city that I had when I was a child. A beautiful, magnificent city with so many great things happening for it. Things before you right now that are significant consideration are the 0.25% tax, which must be communicated to people so that we can bring our infrastructure up to an acceptable state, so that we can solicit the business that we need to continue the growth of our income base. Signage for the downtown so that these businesses can be recognized as businesses. The courtyard's employing some 20 people now. It's a great thing. Our downtown is blossoming. So many great businesses being constructed, being remodeled, buildings being remodeled, so many beautiful things happening in our downtown. And these businesses really need to be seen. It's very important. Certainly the IPMC, the first step in an evolution that I see is absolutely critical. I think it must happen. It must happen. I believe in minimum standards, not just for the downtown, but the eventuality of this, of course, has to be minimum standards for everything, including residential. And I believe that the minimum standards should be standards of acceptable maintenance. I don't believe in punitive actions against landlords, because landlords can be very good things. And I'm not simply reflecting on my own concerns here, but there are some changes in the real estate market that cause very, very fine families now to rent. Because of the recent experiences with the fiscal realities of changes in equity of families. I think that we need to strongly support local business development. And I think that you have done that. And I must say, you've done that magnificently. I think that we need never to stop doing that. It's so important that we're able to introduce new businesses to Salem, Ohio, show them what a beautiful place we have here, and bring them in. That is the crux of this entire issue. And we must repair the failed zoning. Now, these are a real simple little list of things to say, but each one of them are very, very difficult evolutions. You guys have, I hate that I'm even saying this, you've done a magnificent job on so many things so far. And I'm so happy to see where we are now. Please don't back off now. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Scott. Next, Lisa Cahill, the subject signs.
No one who visited downtown Salem the week of Taste in Salem and the pop-up gallery or during Quaker Fest can doubt that there's a revitalization well underway. One lifelong resident told us that she hadn't seen crowds like that since the 1970s. As the sign ordinance is brought forward for its readings, I'm one of a number of downtown business owners who support its passage and who are excited about the changing face of historic downtown Salem. Thank you for your support of this ordinance that will make our downtown more historically accurate and our businesses more visible and therefore more successful.
Thank you, Lisa. Next, Karen Carter, Rentals.
Good evening, Council. I was here about a month ago to explain about the vicious vandalism that was conducted at my home. I talked about the need to investigate what could be done about the slumlords who have run down dilapidated rentals and the responsibility of the people that they're renting to. I know some landlords don't or disagree with me about background checks, but something really has to be done. As I stated a month ago, and again, most crime in Salem is from rentals, as stated by the chief of police. Now, after council last month, I received many phone calls and people supporting my concern with the slumlords. They're worried and frustrated with the many rentals and the high percentage of crime that's linked to them. Our city reputation is actually being damaged with all the crime and drugs that's running through the main arteries of our town. Now, starting point. Several years ago, we had a really good meeting with Mr. Rice, the housing inspector, explaining his job and answered questions from the public. My suggestion would be to maybe have another meeting with him so again he can address the problem that so many people come to me and they should be going to him, and I don't have all the answers because things have changed quite a bit from the last meeting that we had with him. Then if you have it open to the public, then they can ask their own questions. But I know myself, I have a lot of questions. And what's happening to the rentals, how many can they investigate every year, and so forth. So that's just a suggestion. And then everybody can come and ask their own questions. Number two, Mr. Paparotis, have you heard from Howes and Baird yet? I know I had talked to you previously about the assessing.
I haven't, but I
Because
will.
we did send that in a year ago.
Right. Yeah, and he'd mentioned in the fall that he would, but I'll follow up on that.
Okay, all right, thank you, sir.
Yep.
All right, thank you.
All right, thank you, Karen. That concludes the receiving of visitors. We'll move on to report of city officials. Mayor Berlin.
Thank you, Mr. President. As mayor of Salem, I am urging voters to vote yes for the Salem Streets 1/4% 5-year tax levy. If passed, the first phase will be repaving of sections of about 40 streets, which will use $2.6 million of the projected $6 million to be raised over the 5-year lifetime of the levy. With the current 1% permanent income tax, it would take over 10 years to repave those 40 streets, and only if there aren't any other significant capital equipment replacements, which could delay paving even further. All the streets on the initial list have been submitted by our streets foreman, Jim Phillis, based on the condition of those streets. So please vote yes on the 1/4% temporary tax. It will allow us to show our pride in Salem in a very positive way and repave many city streets that have been bypassed, some for decades. I'm also urging voters to vote no on State Issue 3, the legalization of recreational marijuana. This issue needs to go back to the drawing boards for rework to permit the drug for medical use only. There has been a multi-million-dollar campaign promoting Issue 3, so please don't believe all that they are saying. In my opinion, any extra taxes collected will not cover the increased costs to the taxpayers for drug-related addiction problems. Please vote no on State Issue 3. I'll be happy to answer any questions council may have of me at this time.
Questions from the council members? Seeing none, thank you.
Thank you.
Law Director, Attorney Zellers.
Thank you, Mr. President. I have no formal report, but happy to answer any questions.
Mrs. Dickey.
I just have a brief question. I think I know the answer, but I want to be sure. When I was putting together my replacement pages for our ordinances book, I noticed that this year there were a lot of additions of things and a lot of language. It wasn't just some small changes like we'd had before, and those are things that had not come to council. Had you taken a look at these and checked to see that these were just so that we were on the same page as new state laws? Or, for instance, the unlawful advertising of massage and some things about coercion, some language about definitions of coercion that had changed and things like that. Was that what that is?
Yeah, as I think I explained earlier, any of those changes that have not specifically come before council, our code service, codifying service, brings our code in conformity with the changes in the state law. So those things would be something that happened on the state level that we are now in conformity with, so as not to have a conflict.
Thank you.
Any other questions for Attorney Zellers? Seeing none, thank you. Auditor, Mrs. Brothers.
Thank you, Mr. President, members of council, Mayor Berlin. You have an ordinance in front of you regarding to House Bill 5. Fred Paymer could not be here, so I'm here standing in his place to see if anybody has any questions. I can explain a little bit of what this ordinance does. First of all, this ordinance does not replace the old ordinance that we have right now. Going forward, we'll have the two ordinances, this new one, because anything going from tax year 2015 and before still falls under that rule. And anything going on from 2016 on falls under the new rule. There has to be passed before January 1st, or we will not be able to collect any income tax. So it doesn't need the emergency clause. We have enough meetings for, I believe Mr. Cushman is going to just do the first reading. We have enough meetings and enough time that this will be passed prior to January 1st. So I just wanted to be here in case anybody had any questions about this ordinance.
Are there any questions at this time for Mrs. Brothers with regards to that particular ordinance? Mr. Nestick.
Can you just explain a little bit why we're reluctantly adopting this in the last whereas?
Sure. First of all, one of them is how we have the 21-day rule right now, which is if any contractor comes into, so we have the 12-day rule right now. So if any contractor comes into the city and works, if they're here more than 12 days, then they can, the city can go back to day 1 for income tax. What's going to happen effective January 1st, 2016, it's now called the 21-day rule, that if a contractor comes into the city and they're here more than 21 days, it picks up from day 22 on. So that's one of them. There's a 5-year loss carry forward that businesses now can, will be able to use, which right now the city of Salem doesn't allow that. Even if they had a loss, they still have to pay their taxes. And then another one is businesses can offset. I'm sorry, go ahead.
No, it refers specifically to a Supreme Court decision, an Ohio Supreme Court decision. I know this is boilerplate from the Ohio Municipal League, I think, but, you know, is there anything in particular? I mean, I was just curious about that when I read it. We're all looking at Brooke.
I'm giving him a chance to read.
Oh, I'm sorry. I didn't realize.
He knew we were looking at him.
Mr. Nestick, I think what that's referring to is if you take a hard reading of House Bill 5 and the provisions that it enacts, it essentially eliminates a municipality's authority to adjust its own tax code. And that is the reluctance and the position of the Ohio Municipal League as well as the other statewide governmental entities. I mean, there are business-friendly provisions in there which are great for promoting business. However, they also tend to reduce the tax revenue received by a city. The 21-day rule is a good example of what Mrs. Brothers is indicating. But I think the reluctance for the adoption is the fact that we don't have as much control over our own tax code as we've had since the state became a state.
I guess I'm only bringing it up because we as council are being asked to approve that, and I don't know that we as council are all unanimously reluctant to accept it.
You can be reluctant, but really you have no choice to
Yeah.
do it. All
Right.
the cities are mandated this uniformity statewide for local income tax. I mean,
Right.
you already passed a resolution a while ago saying that you're not for it, and
Okay.
that was your voice. And if you don't pass it, like I said, effective January 1st, we will not be able to collect any income tax. So you really, and this ordinance right here is actually a model ordinance that was adopted to Salem, but that's what all the cities are also have to use as well.
Okay.
If I may.
Attorney Zellers.
Thank you. along that same point, Mr. Nestic, I think the issue potentially in that paragraph recommended by the Municipal League is this House bill and the provisions there are, the constitutionality of some of it is being challenged or will be challenged after January 1st. And I think that's a provision in there to protect us in the event that any provisions are determined to be unconstitutional.
Okay, thanks. Any other questions for Attorney Zellers? Seeing none? Thank you. The auditor, any other questions for her? You ran off there. Seeing none, that was all right. Safety Service Director, Mr. Katz.
Thank you, Mr. President, Mayor Berlin, and members of council. On behalf of the administration, I want to thank the Utilities Department for participating in helping fund the cost of the City Hall roof replacement, even though their part of the roof is not being replaced. We anticipate a pre-construction meeting next week with the work to be done shortly thereafter. Next is, this past Saturday, over 25,000 paper leaf bags were passed out free to Salem, Columbiana, and Perry Township residents at Home Depot by the staff of CCH Environmental, who paid for the cost of all those. The Salem High Key Club provided many volunteers throughout the day, and this event would not have been possible or been as successful as it was without them. Additional leaf bags are now available here at City Hall from 8 a.m. until 5 p.m. daily until they are all gone. The street department will begin leaf pickup in the near future as time permits due to our other projects. These bags will be picked up on a regular basis throughout the fall. Once the final date for collection is announced, which we'll wait and see how that goes, there will be no collection until next fall, which means we will not be picking up bags in the spring. And finally, there have been recent issues with people being able to watch Channel 9 and it can't be viewed by Salem residents. We have had our equipment, the whole room checked out, and it's working fine. The problem is with Time Warner equipment and our connection into the city and then to their line. So they're now checking that out. So if any of you are approached on this matter, please have them call Time Warner. Since many people will not be able to view what I'm saying right now, I'm reporting it for council's information and Salem News. Time Warner's service number is 877-772-2253. And let their concerns be known. I know it's been going on for a while, and we've checked everything out in this room that's possible, and we got the final today that everything's working fine. So, any other questions?
Any questions? Mrs. Dickey?
Okay, I wanted to know, first of all, when they do the new roof, did they put in some provision to change the design so that there won't be damage to our roof again from the utilities roof?
They're putting a slight slope in it. They can't change a flat roof to a pitched roof just because it would void any warranty. But they're putting some, I guess, additional drainage on it. But we're still going to have that water runoff from utilities because it's like 2 or 3 feet higher than our roof.
We can't do anything to kind of change that water flow?
No, not without a complete design change, which would void the warranty.
Okay, and then the other thing I wanted to know was, on Park, they're doing, what they're telling us are some gas line changes, and then there were also some similar flags on Tanglewood, and some of the residents were wondering what those were for. Do you have any information on that?
No idea.
Okay, can we check that out for them?
Sure.
Thank you. And then lastly, do you have any status on the buildings that were damaged downtown?
The ones across the street from
The
Fantastic?
Sun
Yes,
Vans.
that's being handled by the fire department, who obviously that's their responsibility. They have been in contact with both property owners. There are 2 property owners involved. They both have structural engineers involved with it. They're trying to get them to combine so they could use one and share the cost. But they're working with our fire department to get it corrected, so.
Thank you.
Any other questions for
Thank you, Mr.
Mr.
President.
Cushman?
Mr. Kentz, I just wanted to add to the Channel 9 viewing. there's, videos are still being uploaded on the website, is that correct?
That's correct. It's also going to be available on YouTube, and we're recording it, so.
Maybe the Salem News would put that in as well.
Yes, we're still functioning as if we're recording, although we know it's not being seen in most households in Salem.
Any other questions for Mr. Kent? Seeing none, thank you.
Thank you.
Utilities, Mr. Weingart.
Thank you, Mr. President, members of council, honorable mayor. Would like to thank Mr. Kentz for his extra hat he's wore this past summer as two times as interim Utilities Commission member. So we thank Ken for his extra work this summer. We do now have the 3 members, and the boat is loaded at this time. Would also like to mention that on Thursday, October 22nd at 4 p.m., the commission will meet at a special meeting to hopefully award a contract for the Benton Road sanitary sewer. Bids were taken, and we think we have some pretty good bids, but they will be revealed at the October 22nd meeting at 4 p.m. Also, I'd like to thank the Utilities Committee, who on October 15th had a meeting with Matt and I for two ordinances which you have before you. As most of you know, when you apply for grant money or loan money, often deadlines are the things that push you to the end pretty quick. But the reason for ordinance number 61 and 62 this evening is to enhance our possibilities to receive either loans or grants from government agencies, Ohio Public Works being one, and the government's office on Appalachia. Those applications are due at the end of this month, so this was the meeting to approve the ordinances. We are not sure of the funding or if it is available. We think we have a pretty good hit to receive those either grants or loans. We do have $100,000 from the Appalachia, from the governor's office of Appalachia, and then the commission gave authority to go ahead and agree to do this sanitary sewer, which is on Snyder Road. That will go intended to go from Freshmark Salem to New Garden Avenue, and then also from Marion Avenue to Snyder Road, to eliminate 2 pumping stations and, of course, eliminate some of the maintenance problems which we have with the pumping stations to keep the valuable business in operation on almost a 7-day-a-week business. So those ordinances are before you, and they are for applications only at this time, but we think we are maybe successful for some of it anyway. The construction cost for this without engineering is about $2,050,000, so it is a large project, but it will serve not only one industry, eliminate 2 pumping stations, and also open up the door to the some 30 acres of industrial lands to the south of Freshmark Salem. So if anyone has any questions, the committee has reviewed it, and if there's any questions, I'll try to answer them.
Any questions for Mr. Weingart? Seeing none, thank you.
Thank you.
Parks Director, Mr. Faber.
Thank you, Mr. President. I have no formal report this evening, but I'd be glad to answer questions anyone might have.
Any questions for the Park Director? Seeing none, thank you. Council Clerk, Mrs. Bricker.
Thank you, I don't have anything.
Right. That concludes the report of city officials. We'll move on to the report of standing committees. Finance, Mr. Cushman.
Thank you, Mr. President. The Finance Committee has not met. However, I'd like to put my committee members on notice. We will be scheduling a meeting, try to anyhow, the first week of November. I'll reach out to you about that in a few days into the future. Mr. President, I have two resolutions and an ordinance this evening, I believe, to read.
All right, the ordinance that dealing with the codification of the municipal income tax, which Mrs. Brothers spoke to, that'll be number 58. The other ordinance dealing with the advertising of bids for the entering into the contract for sale of drafting table, that's number 59. And resolution dealing with the donation of paper leaf bags to the city, that will be number 60.
Thank you.
Thank you. Streets, alleys, and sidewalks, Mr. Paparotis.
Thank you, Mr. President. My committee did not meet, and I have no formal report.
Utilities, Mr. Brown, I know that you weren't at the meeting, but I don't know if you want to give the report or Mrs. Dickey.
Doesn't matter to me.
If you're ready.
I'll go ahead and do it. I do want to thank Mr. Nestic and Cindy for holding the meeting last Thursday before I was out of town, so to speak. And from what I read in the paper, they did an excellent job. But we have two ordinances this evening, and I'd like numbers for, please.
With that, we have one ordinance that authorizing the superintendent of utilities to prepare and submit an application to accept financial assistance from the Public Works Commission. That's number 61. And resolution that dealing again with the superintendent of utilities to apply for the governor's office of Appalachia Development Services Agency for a grant. That's number 62.
Thank you very much.
Traffic and safety, Mr. Whitehill.
Thank you, Mr. President. My committee has not met. I have no report.
Rules and ordinances, Mrs. Dickey.
Rules and Ordinance Committee met October 7th at 6 p.m. All members were present. The first agenda item was request to vacate an alley off of New Garden Avenue. The request had previously been approved conditionally by the Planning Commission. The condition was the Utilities Department had an easement in the alley, and the Planning Commission asked if the utilities still needed the easement. The utilities agreed to relinquish the easement rights, and Mr. Drummond made the motion to send the issue to council. Mr. Brown seconded that motion. It passed 3-0. The second agenda was standards examples to be added to the addendum for projecting signs ordinance. Mr. Cowan was present and presented copies of the suggestions. They were reviewed and discussed by the committee. Mr. Drummond asked if Mr. Cowan would be able to download the examples to the website, and Mr. Cowan stated that he could. Also, Mrs. Dickey informed the committee that Ms. Grilly stated that she and members of the Preservation Society are willing to give free design assistance to businesses needing help with signs. Mr. Brown made the motion to accept the addendum and sent to council to add to the ordinance being considered. Mr. Drummond seconded the motion. It passed 3-0. Mr. Cowan states that he will forward this information to the law director to ready them for council for the next meeting. The last topic on the agenda was possible location of stores selling marijuana and marijuana products in the event that Issue 3 passes. There were concerns by economic development and residents as to these possible locations. The concerns centered around possible adverse effects of marijuana sales locations on locating and retaining possible businesses in the downtown and access by children. Mr. Drummond read the section of the bill stating that restriction of these locations was determined by the state as outlined in the bill, being not within 1,000 feet of a church, daycare, playground, etc. The committee discussed these sales and tabled the subject pending determination of the restrictions by the law director. The motion was made to adjourn the meeting by Mr. Brown, seconded by Mr. Drummond. Thank you.
Thank you. Parks, Mr. Drummond.
Thank you, Mr. President. Parks Committee has not met. I have no formal report.
Economic Development, Mr. Nestic.
The Economic Development Committee did not meet. However, I do have an ordinance to introduce tonight that did result from the previous Economic Development Committee meeting.
All right. And with that, let's dealing with creating a chapter 1337, which is dealing with the International Property Maintenance Code, which there was some discussion earlier from the audience, and that will be ordinance number 63.
Thank you.
Committee of the Whole, Mr. Nestic.
The Committee of the Whole did not meet. I do not have a report.
Very good. That concludes the report of standing committees. Move then to second and third readings of ordinances and resolutions. Mrs. Dickey.
I would like to have ordinance 12 read for its second reading tonight.
All right, Madam Clerk, would you please read ordinance 12 by title only for its second reading this evening?
Being an ordinance amending Section 1195.05C of Chapter 1195 of Title VII of Part 11 of the Codified Ordinances of the City of Salem regarding general requirements for all signs and districts.
Thank you. That concludes the second and third readings of ordinances and resolutions. We'll move on to the introduction of ordinances and resolutions. Mr. Cushman.
Thank you, Mr. President. I move that the council suspend council rules so that ordinance number 58 can be considered tonight.
A second on that. Mr. Whitehill. Madam Clerk, would you please call the roll?
Mr. Brown?
Yes.
Mr. Cushman?
Yes.
Mrs. Dickey?
Yes.
Mr. Drummond?
Yes.
Mr. Nestick?
Yes.
Mr. Paparotis?
Yes.
Mr. Whitehill?
Yes.
Council rules are suspended. Mr. Cushman.
President, I move the clerk read ordinance number 58 by title only for its first reading.
All right. Madam Clerk, would you please read ordinance number 58 by title only for its first reading this evening?
Being an ordinance to adopt Chapter 182 of the Codified Ordinances of the City of Salem regarding municipal income tax.
All right, Mr. Cushman.
President, I move the council suspend council rules so that ordinance number 59 can be considered tonight.
Is there a second on that? Mr. Brown. Madam Clerk, would you please call the roll?
Mr. Brown?
Yes.
Mr. Cushman?
Yes.
Mrs. Dickey?
Yes.
Mr. Drummond?
Yes.
Mr. Nestick?
Yes.
Mr. Paparotis?
Yes.
Mr. Whitehill?
Yes.
All right, council rules are suspended. Mr. Cushman.
Thank you, Mr. President. I move the clerk read ordinance 59 by title only for its first reading.
All right, Madam Clerk, would you please read ordinance number 59 by title only for its first reading?
Being an ordinance authorizing the Director of Public Service and Safety to advertise for bids and enter into contract for the sale of one 1960 oak 72 by 36 drafting table with blueprint drawers.
Thank you. Mr. Cushman.
Mr. President, I move that the council suspend council rules and resolution number 60 can be considered tonight.
Is there a second on that? Mrs. Dickey. Madam Clerk, would you please call the roll?
Mr. Whitehill?
Yes.
Mr. Paparotis?
Yes.
Mr. Nestick?
Yes.
Mr. Drummond?
Yes.
Mrs. Dickey?
Yes.
Mr. Cushman?
Yes.
Mr. Brown?
Yes.
All right, council rules are suspended. Mr. Cushman.
Mr. President, I'd like to ask Madam Clerk to please read resolution number 60 by title only for passage.
All right. Madam Clerk, would you please read resolution number 60 by title only for passage this evening?
Being a resolution to accept a donation of paper leaf bags to the City of Salem and to express appreciation to CCH Environmental for their generous donation.
Thank you. Mr. Brown.
Thank you, Mr. President. I'd like to waive statutory rules that ordinance number 61 can have all three readings this evening with the emergency clause for passage.
Point of order, we would need council rules suspended.
Don't you want to take
Did we not have it 24 hours beforehand?
I don't believe so.
Okay.
Did you have this yesterday?
No, but don't you want me to take roll on the passage of this resolution, or don't we?
Oh, did I?
Came in Monday at 4:57.
We didn't take roll on the passage.
My bad. I thought we had. If you go ahead and call the roll, that was my mistake with regards to that as to the leaf bags for passage, please.
Mr. Whitehill?
Yes.
Mr. Pepperidis?
Yes.
Mr. Nestick?
Yes.
Mr. Drummond?
Yes.
Mrs. Dickey?
Yes.
Mr. Cushman?
Yes.
Mr. Brown?
Yes.
Thank you very much. Now we'll move forward. I guess, Mr. Brown, Attorney Zellers is saying that although this came out of committee, we didn't have it 24 hours prior to this meeting.
Right.
So if we could
So
have,
last Thursday, so I can just waive statutory rules.
well, I think what you're saying is we didn't actually have the ordinance in hand.
That's correct. So it would need the suspension of council rules first.
So what do you want to do?
Council rules suspended
Okay.
first, if we could
That's
have a
fine with
motion
me.
with that.
I'm a little under the weather tonight.
That's all right.
I'd like to waive council rules that ordinance number 61 can be, have all three readings this evening, for passage with the emergency clause.
Is there a second on that? Mrs. Dickey? Madam Clerk, would you please call the roll on the suspension of council rules?
Mr. Brown?
Yes.
Mr. Cushman?
Yes.
Mrs. Dickey?
Yes.
Mr. Drummond?
Yes.
Mr. Nestick?
Yes.
Mr. Pepperidis?
Yes.
Mr. Whitehill?
Yes.
All right, council rules are suspended. Mr. Brown?
Yes, thank you. Request that ordinance number 61 waive statutory rules so that we voted on this evening for passage with the emergency clause.
Is there a second on that? Mr. Drummond? Madam Clerk, would you please call the roll?
Mr. Whitehill?
Yes.
Mr. Pepperidis?
Yes.
Mr. Nestick?
Yes.
Mr. Drummond?
Yes.
Mrs. Dickey?
Yes.
Mr. Cushman?
Yes.
Mr. Brown?
Yes,
The statutory rules are suspended. Mr. Brown?
thank you. Resolution number 62, I'd like to have addressed, no, excuse me, my head's killing me. Waive statutory rules so we can have all three readings this evening with the emergency clause.
Mr. Brown, on 61, we've had the council rules suspended and the statutory rules suspended.
Oh,
Now
I'm
we
sorry,
Need that.
I'm sorry.
To ask for the
I follow you,
reading.
sir.
That's all
I'd
right.
like to have ordinance number 61 read. Excuse me, I'm having a headache.
That's right, you want that for the first, second, and third readings, correct?
Okay,
With emergency
okay.
clause.
I'd like to have all three readings this evening for passage with the emergency clause.
Madam Clerk, could you please read ordinance number 61 by title only for its first, second, and third readings this evening with emergency clause?
Being an ordinance authorizing the superintendent of utilities to prepare and submit an application to accept financial assistance from the Ohio Public Works Commission State Capital Improvement Program, and upon receipt of said financial assistance, authorize the superintendent of utilities to sign and execute contracts for the construction of the sanitary sewer to be known as the Snyder Road Sanitary Trunk Sewer and declaring an emergency.
All right, is there any discussion with regards to ordinance number 61?
I got some.
Seeing none, Madam Clerk, would you please call the roll on ordinance number 61 for passage this evening?
Mr. Brown?
Yes.
Mr. Cushman?
Yes.
Mrs. Dickey?
Yes.
Mr. Drummond?
Yes.
Mr. Nestick?
Yes.
Mr. Pepperidis?
Yes.
Mr. Whitehill?
Yes.
It passes with 7 yeas. Mr. Brown?
Thank you, Mr. President. Resolution number 62, I'd like to waive council rules so it can be introduced this evening.
All right, is there a
All
second?
three readings with the emergency clause.
All right, thank you. Mr. Drummond, second on that. Madam Clerk, would you please call the roll?
Mr. Whitehill?
Yes.
Mr. Pepperidis?
Yes.
Mr. Nestick?
Yes.
Mr. Drummond?
Yes.
Mrs. Dickey?
Yes.
Mr. Cushman?
Yes.
Mr. Brown?
Yes.
All right, council rules are suspended. Mr. Brown?
Thank you, Mr. President. I'd like to waive statutory rules on resolution number 62, that is so that I can have all three readings this evening for passage with the emergency clause.
Is there a second on that? Mr. Whitehill? Madam Clerk, would you please call the roll?
Mr. Brown?
Yes.
Mr. Cushman?
Yes.
Mrs. Dickey?
Yes.
Mr. Drummond?
Yes.
Mr. Nestick?
Yes.
Mr. Pepperidis?
Yes.
Mr. Whitehill?
Yes.
Statutory rules are suspended. Mr. Brown?
Yes, thank you. I'd like to have resolution number 62 read by title only for passage this evening with the emergency clause.
All right, Madam Clerk, would you please read resolution number 62 by title only for its first, second, and third readings this evening with the emergency clause?
Being a resolution authorizing the superintendent of utilities to apply for Governor's Office of Appalachia, Ohio Department Services Agency, grant funding for the Salem wastewater sewer improvement for heavy industrial site stabilization Freshmark project and declaring an emergency.
Is there any discussion as to resolution number 62? Seeing none, Madam Clerk, would you please call the roll on resolution number 62 for passage this evening?
Mr. Nestick?
Yes.
Mr. Brown?
Yes.
Mrs. Dickey?
Yes.
Mr. Drummond?
Yes.
Mr. Whitehill?
Yes.
Mr. Paparotis?
Yes.
Mr. Cushman?
Yes.
Passes with 7 yeas. Mr. Nestick?
Yes, Mr. President, I request that the clerk read ordinance number 63 for its first reading tonight by title only.
If I may, point of order. Mr. Nestick, unfortunately, it was not here 24 hours ahead of time either, so we'd still have to suspend council rules to give it its
Okay.
first reading.
Well, then I make a motion to suspend council rules so that ordinance number 63 can have its first reading tonight.
Mr. Drummond, second. Madam Clerk, would you please call the roll?
Mr. Whitehill?
Yes.
Mr. Paparotis?
Yes.
Mr. Nestick?
Yes.
Mr. Drummond?
Yes.
Mrs. Dickey?
Yes.
Mr. Cushman?
Yes.
Mr. Brown?
Yes.
Okay. Council rules are suspended. Mr. Nestick?
Yes, thank you, Mr. President. I request that the clerk read ordinance number 63 by title only for its first reading tonight.
All right, Madam Clerk, would you please read ordinance number 63 by title only for its first reading this evening?
Being an ordinance creating Chapter 1337 of the Codified Ordinances of the City of Salem, which adopts and incorporates by reference the International Property Maintenance Code, subject to the specific provisions stated herein, for the purpose of regulating and governing the conditions and maintenance of all property, buildings, and structures within the C3 Central Commercial Zoning District in the City of Salem.
Okay, thank you. That concludes the introduction of ordinances and resolutions this evening. Move on. There's the one issue for the next meeting. I almost overlooked this. It would fall on election night. Is anybody willing to make a motion to change the meeting to the following Wednesday? Mr. Brown makes the motion. Is there a second? Mr. Whitehill? Madam Clerk, would you please call the roll?
Mr. Brown?
Yes.
Mr. Cushman?
Excuse me, Mr. President, you said the following Wednesday or the next day?
The next day.
Okay.
I'm sorry.
Yes.
Mrs. Dickey?
Yes.
Mr. Drummond?
Yes.
Mr. Nestick?
Yes.
Mr. Paparotis?
Yes.
Mr. Whitehill?
Yes.
All right. Motion carries. The meeting will then be changed to the 4th, which will be the Wednesday after the election day. Now we'll go ahead and move to pleasure of council. Mr. Cushman?
Thank you, Mr. President. I would like to publicly acknowledge Auditor Betty Brothers, Deputy Auditor Melissa Heiner, and part-time employee Vicki Cope Weaver for their hard work and dedication in earning the State of Ohio's Auditor of the State Award for a clean 2014 audit report. This was the second consecutive year that the city's auditor office has won that award, and I would like to publicly thank them all for a job well done. And secondly, I would please encourage everyone to get out and vote yes on the Salem streets. That's all.
Very good, thank you. Mr. Drummond?
Thank you, Mr. President. Happy birthday to my younger brother.
Okay, very good. Mr. Nestick?
Thank you. I have nothing other than to encourage people to get out and vote, and please vote for the Salem Streets levy also.
Okay. Mr. Brown?
Thank you. Get out and vote, and I want to thank the people who sent me cards and sent me emails and phone calls to get well. Thank you.
Mr. Paparotis?
I'd like to encourage everyone also to come out and vote for the street tax. It's very important, and appreciate it.
Mr. Whitehill?
Thank you, Mr. President. A couple comments. One is in response to Mr. Cahill, the good families who are forced to rent now, I would concur that through no fault of their own, they may be in that situation. But I would add that they deserve not to have to live next door to dysfunction. They deserve not to have to live in subpar dwellings. And I agree that our approach should be measured, and I look forward to resuming our dialogue on how to do that. I also was pretty clearly on record as a lone wolf in the fact that the tax I felt should be permanent, but obviously it was because I supported long-term infrastructure maintenance and repair, and so I would also encourage people to support that tax. We have a very busy community theater right now. One production just wrapped, another one is in process now, and we have a Christmas one underway also at the same time. So as part of our downtown coming alive, please support the community theater as well. And lastly, a very happy birthday to my son David, who just turned 7 on Saturday.
Very good, thank you. Mrs. Dickey?
I would like to remind people that trick or treat is coming up and that there will be children out with masks, maybe with not as good a vision or a little excited. So please be careful when you're going through our streets that you don't make contact with those children with your car. Just watch out for them a little closer. Also, please get out and vote. Sometimes our elections can be determined by as little as just a handful of votes. So your vote does count, especially in this city. And also, when your leaves are falling, if you would please rake them up and keep them away from the sewers and the drainage areas so that we don't have any problems. And if you have elderly or disabled neighbors, maybe it would be nice to help them. Thank you.
With regards to the tax, I think I made it clear at the last meeting and went into a little bit of detail with regards to that, why I felt that it was necessary. Tonight, I just would like to point out that there has been in the past tax increases that have been attempted, but it's been just asking for the money to go into the general fund and to trust council to do with it what they would be able to, and that wouldn't just reflect the current council, but councils in the future. With regards to this, I don't know how it can be any more fair than to have it presented as such that it's going to go for the streets. Now, I simplify it with that and not go into all the details of specifically with the streets, what would be taken care of, but the streets would be taken care of. That's what the money would go for. That would help the city in so many different ways, just for the people that live here, for the potential of new business, and in various other ways with regards to getting people that might want to move here, just because of the appearance sake with regards to that, with everything else that we have to offer in the city. So I would most definitely encourage everybody to get out and vote in a positive manner for that. Thank you. That concludes our meeting then.